Bonjour à tous.
Hello, everyone. If you would like to take a seat, we're going to start this debate. This debate may be a bit difficult to conduct regarding the prestigious speakers that we have around this round table. The theme is very important, reindustrializing France. This is a complicated topic. We have around the table the main French industrialists. Do they have solutions? Are their solutions the solutions of yesterday? And maybe we should be looking at tomorrow's solution. I'm going to start with Hélène Rey, who you know, who's a member of the Cercle des Économistes, who's a professor at the London Business School, who is a major specialist of international macroeconomics and who's going to be looking into what is France missing to reindustrialize its economy. Next to her, we have Stéphane Richard, who's the president, CEO of Orange, who will tell us about the importance of digitization of the economy, the fiber, 5G. We're going to also talk about the climate of trust. Next to him, we have Laurent Berger, who's the general secretary of the CFDT. He's going to explain to us that we need a social dialogue that is promising, that is constructive, and it will very important to modernize the industry. Next to him, we have Catherine McGregor, who's general managing director of ENGIE. I think this is the first time we're having her with us at these meetings, Cercle des Économistes. So we have people representing the industry. How are they managing this to prepare tomorrow? Ross McInnes, who's the president of the board of Safran, who will be speaking along different lines than other people. He's going to tell us that we need a state that is not acting as a strategist. And we have also Jean-Bernard Lévy, Group EDF, Renewable Energies. How does he see the future of our country? I'll leave the floor to Hélène Rey. And then we will launch the debate, and you'll be able to ask your questions. Thank you, Edwige. Hello, everyone. We have talked a lot about the necessity to reindustrialize France lately, and it's because the COVID crisis has shown in a very acute way the weakness of the French industry. At the beginning of the years 2000, the French and German exports of pharmaceutical goods and medical goods were about similar. It's not the case anymore. And our specialization now is backing on a number of sectors, which is the aeronautics, luxury goods, nuclear sector, and the French external growth trade is decreasing. So the question today is, how can we constitute new energy and industry sectors that are performing? So the first question I'm going to be asking is, there's no use to run after the industry that's delocalized to enjoy the low cost of international localization. There's no use to produce paracetamol in France. We can diversify our suppliers, but it would be counterproductive to manufacture everything in France, even if it is still possible. The second thought coming from that first idea is that the future of the industry seems to be coming from innovation and the development of new technologies rather than revisiting old industries that are decreased. For example, semiconductors. The necessity of having an industry that is more disruptive and more bold should be accelerated by the large mutations that we are seeing. The increase of the price of carbon, digitalization, artificial intelligence, and the new energies should push us right now to be bold. But let's be careful. Some of these innovations on the technological side have to be focusing on the general good, like digitization, robotization, should be dealt with in different ways by the actors of the private sector and with redistributive effects that are different between capital and workforce, between specialized worker, qualified worker, and unqualified worker. So we have to make sure that the use of these energy industries go towards the general good. We have to also be too simplistic in our way of looking at things and think that robotization necessarily leads to job cuts. There's an interesting article from Givier Jardel, a young economist, and Philippe Ayon, who show that in the manufacturing sector in France, an automation of the task has led to a decrease of price, an increase of sales and jobs, including for the people who are not qualified. So in some cases, robots may create some jobs and not destroy them. At this stage, I'm going to go fast. We are wondering what public policies could facilitate innovation and the structuring of industrial networks. Firstly, education. In the world today, people must change jobs more often than they did before, and the human capital is more and more important. However, the data from the OECD show that France is not in a good place based on its basic skills for adults. What can the state do, universities, schools, the public sector, to change that? Second question, to improve the link between research and industry. Is the model of the DARPA, the American DARPA, is it a good one? Can we use it? Secondly, taxes. Do we need to review our tax systems because the taxes are still very high, or to improve our production, to protect better the humans? Third lead and last for me, should we transform deeply the dialogue and the relationship between the unions and the managers to change the awareness of the French people and to change the trust of the French people? The adoption of new technologies is going to make this issue of trust even more crucial. So what should we do? We could also talk about the lack of integration of the European sector in digital sectors, but I'm going to stop here because I am very anxious to hear the proposals and the suggestions from our panel. You've launched a good debate because relocalizing paracetamol in France is not a good idea, and I think Bruno Le Maire was happy not to do that, I was actually happy that we're localizing in France. Then you heard Laurent Berger, who was whispering something to the ear of Stéphane Richard. So Jean-Bernard Lévy, EDF, is it the industry of the past, the industry of the future? Is the Hercules project a way to reindustrialize France? You have the floor. You have 3 or 4 minutes. Hello, everyone. Thank you. First of all, I would like to say that I am what Hélène described. First of all, energy is an industry and a catalyzer for many other industries at the same time. We are a major provider of energy. When we talk about nuclear, and I want to thank Hélène Rey to remind us that it is an important industry and that France exports largely. We talked also about renewable energies. Today, in the wind farms, we have plants in France that are. We have solar energy. That was 10 years ago, but a lot of things happened. The European policy happened, and it was in favor of the competitiveness of solutions and not of jobs, which means that there are no longer industries of solar energy in France. So energy as a way to catalyze a number of industries, because for many industries, the energy bill plays a very important factor. France is in a good place for that, thanks to the nuclear energy, everything that was built for decades. And because we have an electricity system that is national and has a scale effects and solidarity as well in a network that is as meshed as the French one, to allow the French industries to benefit of costs that are lower than in neighboring countries. Industries of today industries of tomorrow, there's no doubt that the priority is to fight climate change and global warming. You can see, we can measure it here in Aix-en-Provence, and it gives us some prospects. What will be the ecosystem that will allow French actors and European actors to grow, to capitalize on that? It is up to Europe to set the tone. There's a very big expectation in 9 or 10 days. It's the 14th of July. The 14th of July will see the project of an implementation of the European Green Deal with a number of directives, which, when they'll be adopted in about 2 years' time, will give a major acceleration to projects of decarbonation and a system of a carbon mechanism at the border, which will be, we hope, a major lever for decarbonation. Last thing that I want to say regarding the ecosystem, there's a very important point, is the vocational training and the psychology around the industry. Does France like plants? Does political leaders like plants and factories? Do people expect their child to go work in a factory? Do teachers encourage their students at high school, university to eventually go work in a plant? And I think we have a long way to go here. We may never be Koreans, but today, if we look around the neighboring countries, we have a lot of progress to make. I give you an example. In a company such as EDF, we wonder on how we will reach the goals that are set by the Parliament of 40% women, gender balance, because in an engineering school, or when you have 23% of women, and in a company with mostly engineers, we are 23%. We are 29%, but to get to 40 is going to be quite a gap. I'm sure you will find a solution, Jean-Bernard Lévy. Just if you had one condition, a necessary condition for you, for France to reindustrialize, one proposal, what would it be? I think that the first proposal to make, and this is also to give the floor to Laurent Berger, it would be to re-examine the whole of the tax system and the work hours, the working hours. We have a tax system that is very heavy for us. We don't want to get into that. It's true for us. It's true for the telecommunication sector. Taxes on industrial assets, that is a break to investment. And also working hours, whether it's by week, by month, by years, that are not enough compared to a lot of our competitors. And there's also the issue of retirements, but that's another issue. I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to put your masks on. We are far away. We are keeping our distance, but I was told to remind you to wear your masks. Ross McGuinness, president of the board of Safran. Safran is aeronautics, defense. This morning, in the interviews given to the Parisien, Bruno Le Maire said that it's not necessarily the industry of tomorrow. What are you asking for? What do you want? I would like to correct your introduction. I would like a garden state and not a fireman state, and that's how they will be able to be providing a good strategy. So in order to be a good gardener, a lot of leaders, political leaders and industry leaders make a list. And I don't want to criticize what was done during the crisis. These were measures that were indispensable for the sector and very well targeted in the context of the recovery. But it doesn't set the base for long-term policy. So I will resist to the temptation to go to these booth kind of measures which generate complexity and injustice. Second point, the education and the financial balance. So first of all, training. Most of our companies find it difficult to recruit in jobs which are well paid, and to keep the vocational training throughout their life, which is very important. Our our school system is a machine to produce failure. 2000 and many young people come out of it without having being in charge, being capable to read and write and be writing good essays properly. The state, which is the guarantee of our educational system, has failed. If you look at the cost for students in the higher education has dropped, whereas it's growing everywhere. So there needs to be made a very important financial effort. The Institut Montaigne mentioned $10 billion per year. The equity, that's the second question. We could tell that companies, including the most modest of them, lack equity. For those of us who do accounting, the best way to reconstitute equity is through the P&L. So I agree with what Jean-Bernard Lévy said here. We have the most stupid tax in the world, which is the tax on wealth, but we also have a tax on production. There's a gap of 2 points of GDP for the companies, particularly for industry companies, because of this production tax. So instead of having these very complex mechanisms to recreate equity, hydrogen plants, Catherine, or to repair and put some band-aids on some topics, let's reconstitute our equity. We have gone some part of the way, but we have to go there. So education, a dozen of billion, and 40 billion to recreate our equity and make our country more attractive to for a better industry. How do we finance that? We've heard throughout all these roundtables that people work for the elderly. The gap in income between the young and the old one, over 64, is over 15%. The part of the ascendant transfer, as we call it, is 20%. It's fundamentally unjust, and we should increase either the length of contribution before people go on retirement by 2 or 3 years, which will allow to finance part of the measures that I just described. So it's a measure that is economically smart and socially just. And our current system is based on two hypotheses. That the first one is that the young people will work hard, will toil and reimburse, and in the European context that Germany will pay for the others. I think we've already tried that and it doesn't work. So I have two thoughts here. A quote from Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, who left us recently: you don't heal wounds by licking them with wooden tongues. The second, and I will quote Margaret Thatcher, and I'm not ashamed to do so, when we talk about the retirement system. The problem with socialism is you end up using other people's money. Catherine McGregor, before I give you the floor, Laurent Berger, do you have something to say about what Ross McInnes said on the pension issue? Can you agree with what he just said? Can you let it slide? Hello, I am a big Democrat, so I let everything slide as long as it stays correct. It was correct in the tone. I just want to say a word, and I'm sorry if in front of this prestigious panel, I'm going to be a bit of a party pooper. Since 2008, since I am really in charge, there was a labor law that was too constraining and not agile. We've made the redundancy procedures easier, smoother. We've worked on social plans, redundancy plan, and then the tax was also meddled with. There was a drop of the wealth tax, etc. So maybe there's still things to be done. We've increased the length of work time throughout the life, which keeps increasing. People go on retirement later than before. Marisol Touraine confirmed that to me, that people will need to work longer to go on retirement. But we need to have more possibility. There's a responsibility of the state there. There's an ecosystem, and there's what the companies must do. what companies must do, and in terms of social dialogue, in terms of associating the employees to the company strategy. That's my reaction. After a while, okay, yeah, but if it's just the only strategic thinking that we're having on the reindustrialization of France, if it's only up to what the state should do in the professional sectors, I think that's not going to be enough. Thank you very much, Laurent Berger.
Catherine McGregor.
Catherine McGregor, the CEO of Engie. So you joined this position not a long time ago, but you are very familiar with the industry, but you come from the oil industry. So what can be done in order to reindustrialize France? What is your take on that? Hi, everyone. Delighted to be with you today. So it's the first time that I've attended this conference because I joined Engie 6 months ago. Engie is at the heart of energy transition. So the question that you've raised, I'll try to address it by using Jean-Bernard Lévy's words. Energy transition is the energy as a catalyst of France's reindustrialization. It's a word that is significant today if you consider the industry. It is boosted by customers, clients, employees, shareholders, and by all these stakeholders, so that it turns out to be carbon-free. So France should continue to provide and supply energy that is affordable and low carbon energy to the different industrial sectors in order to tap competitiveness being very specific to our country. When we talk about energy, there is no doubt that we need to focus in the long term. So energy systems have to be planned. There are huge investments that need to be made. Regulations have to be enforced. So decisions have to be made now. So if I cast a future-oriented eye, 2050, it might seem far away, but when you consider energy systems, the time frame is short. In 2050, most nuclear reactors that are currently operating will have reached the end of their life cycle. So carbon-free energy that we like quite a lot, how will it be supplied? Probably with nuclear solutions. Jean-Bernard Lévy is working on that. We'll have to be vigilant about the excessive costs regarding the nuclear industry. But if we take into account ambitious assumptions regarding the development of nuclear energy, we won't reach the objective. So gas will have a role to play. It has to become greener. We have to focus on hydrogas. But there is no doubt that energy and renewable energies will have to play a key role with a regard to a carbon-free energy mix in 2050. And France is lagging behind. So we need to catch up and we need to fast-track the process. There are two topics that are critical. So we have lots of operations in different countries, and there are some specific obstacles in France that are very specific. So there are two topics that I would like to highlight. Regulations, procedures, governing the new development patterns, planning, more volume, visibility, to have a better time frame, to fast-track the procedures. And it's important to revamp the different procedures, and we could work along the lines of what the neighboring countries are doing. Second topic, an extremely pivotal topic, acceptance, citizens' acceptance regarding renewable energy projects. And on this front, we have a long way to go. So, of course, we have some responsibilities to shoulder. As an industrialist, we have to lead by example when it comes to developing these projects, when it comes to achieving these projects. Moreover, it's important to liaise with the different stakeholders. It should be a fruitful process. We need to pay heed to their concerns. We need to use participation-based systems for citizens. We need to be educational. We need to use rational, tangible information, but there are things that we shouldn't set aside. I mean, we need to listen to irrational comments, rhetoric. So we need to come up with answers. And for industrialists, for scientists, for engineers, it's not easy. It doesn't come as a matter of course. So we need to work on that. So we need to improve. So industrialists, I mean, should be more educational. So renewable energies, I know that people tend to get emotional about renewable energies, but people should buy in renewable energies. It's a prerequisite if we want France to reindustrialise itself, because we need to get a source of energy that is reliable, affordable, and in sufficient quantity in a not too distant future. Thank you, Mrs. McGregor. So Xavier Bertrand was with us, and I can tell you that you have a fight, I mean, to wage, or combat to wage. I mean, you can organize a debate between Mrs. McGregor and Xavier Bertrand. Mr. Levy, regarding the nuclear industry, I mean, it takes a long time for the state to make decisions. Maybe there's a loss of skills within the different sectors. Yes, yes, of course, you're right. Stéphane Richard, infrastructures, 5G, French people being reluctant to 5G, the fiber blueprint. So it's very important, I mean, for the industries of tomorrow. Technology will make it possible for France, I mean, to reindustrialize itself. What is your take on that? What are your proposals? What can you do? First of all, the bottom line is that if you consider reindustrialization, digital transformation of industry should be forthcoming for companies. And I think that the two major industrial powers on the planet, Germany and China, are a glaring example of that. These are the two countries that are at the most advanced stage in the 4.0 industry, or the introduction of 5G in the production processes. So reindustrialization in France, it means that there should be an accelerated digital transformation for all companies, whatever their size. When we ask businesses and companies, what are the lessons learned following the health crisis, they will tell you that it's necessary to fast-track digital transformation. To do so, it's important to be equipped with facilities. This is the key. So Orange, amongst others, could be responsible for that. Even though we don't have plants, we don't have factories, we massively invest in our facilities. The telecommunications sector is worth 10 million euros in terms of investment. Orange, if I take into account 2010, 2020, 13 billion euros have been invested in fiber optics. So we invest quite a lot. We are critical investors in our infrastructures regarding fixed broadband technology. 25 million households have been connected. So France has decided to pull out all the stops. In 2020, we have deployed more fiber connections than in 2019, despite the health crisis, despite lockdowns. So I can tell you that this is a significant effort, and everybody should be mobilized. I mean, 15 direct jobs being involved. So I can tell you that it's a task, but this task has to be completed, and we're on the right track. Then 5G. Europe is lagging behind, but we decided to deploy it. So 5G should be adopted by the industry. Of course, we have good experiments and experiences. 5G plants, if you consider them, they are quite outstanding. They are small robots that are autonomous. All production data are pooled on the site in the edge cloud in a fully secure and safe way. So it's still a fledgling process. We still have a long way to go. And free commons, data, so data protection and data control. This is a key challenge in Europe. everybody knows that there are some migration processes to the cloud for all companies. They migrate their data to the cloud. The cloud operators are, for most of them, American, and there are some Chinese operators as well. But for Europe, it's a matter of getting control of this data. That's why we launched a project called Blue. This is a trust-based cloud with some data centers being based in Europe and clear protection regarding the extraterritorial regulations and especially the American regulations. So data control is central, and then cyber security. The world is increasingly digital, so there's a risk. Cyber attacks constitute the major risk. We need to upgrade our strategy, and we need to invest massively. We tried to preempt the situation. We set up a unit, but that's not enough, a European unit, but that's not enough. And I don't think that in our sector we could say a lot, but I do agree with Ross. We shouldn't have a sort of a counter-based approach. So I think that we were wrong with the States, with Europe. So there's something that I would like to highlight. The spectrum, so mobile frequencies, and the attitude of states to that process. When you have a look at the situation of the past 20 years, allow me to talk about Europe, but in Europe we have placed a high burden on the operators. Orange paid 8 billion euros in order to get access to the frequencies. I mean, for mobile telephony, it was a strategic, historic error. The sector has been impaired. I mean, we paid 8 billion euros, and we could have used 8 billion euros in terms of investments. And I think that French authorities and European authorities should have pondered over the allocation of frequencies. So you've said that you don't need a strategic state, but when you have a fiber plan, I think it's good for you. Isn't it? Yeah, it's a good choice. But it was executed the French way, the Colbert way. But we liaised with the territories and regions. When you consider that plan, there was a regulation framework, zones with public funds and private funds, zones that are under the helm of private funds. So it's a new type of Colbert system. So a roadmap with public funds and the commitments of operators. A quick answer before I give the floor to Laurent Berger. Robots do not destroy jobs. Your new plants, your new factories, 5G, 6G companies, I mean, don't they destroy jobs? Regarding 5G, so we turn to a team of economists in order to gauge the impact on jobs. According to the figures, we think that 5G has a potential i.e. to create 430,000 jobs in France, net jobs. So that's a piece of good news. It does highlight what we think. So there's more creation and value with these jobs. These jobs will be different, of course, to those of the past, but the technology and our technology and digital technologies have a huge potential to create net jobs, and this potential is huge, and not only in the field of robots, but in a broader way, especially for the economy. Ross McInnes, you don't seem to agree. Robots, so the countries that used the highest number of robots are those that have created a lot of jobs, and robots, I mean, will replace painful jobs, and painful jobs are a source of diseases, muscular diseases. So, Mr. Berger, regarding social dialogue, it's important, I mean, to revisit the relations that are in force in order to get back to an industry. What do you think of that? You, the leader of CFDT, the main French trade union. Of course, we need to go further. If we take the example of our neighbor, one of the closest neighbor, we need to think about the industrial strategy, and the industrial strategy is shared much more than in France as part of social dialogue, labor management dialogue. Of course, I'm a trade unionist. I could talk about the economy and the way we can reindustrialize France, but you have to consider the European situation, and the European situation is better than what it was in the past. I mean, we can't do things without Europe, whatever you might think. The industrial ecosystems of Thierry Breton, the Green Deal. So if you consider reindustrialization processes, we need to involve and to take into account the social rights and ecological transition. Nicolas Schmidt is here, and he would confirm what I've said. So at a European level, there's a problem. It's a bit slow. It's a bit slow. It's time-consuming, but it's fundamental. Things are moving slowly in Europe. But I can tell you that we have a good bedrock in Europe in order to come up with a strategy based on reindustrialization of a continent, especially France. Second element, the role of a state. So I would like to tell you, and Stéphane Richard alluded to that, the state, I mean, should be a strategist. The state should plan, should anticipate, but public power doesn't boil down to a state. You have to take into account the role of regions. It is said that it's not possible to get the necessary skills and competencies, I mean, for some companies, but let's face it, we tried many experiments at a national level. So, of course, I mean, some answers could be found at a regional level, at a territorial level, and it's wrong to think that everything will be done by a centralizing state, and this is one of the mistakes that we've made recently. And second element, we need to go further regarding the definition of a strategy, the spin-off effects in terms of skills and skills redeployment. So I do agree with what you've said about robots. You need to take into account employees. It's important to pay heed to employees, and they have a different take, in fact. So it's important to come up with new definitions of strategy. We need to focus on dialogue. We need to talk about working conditions, employment conditions, and it's important to highlight the industrial strategy. And when these things are taken into account, I mean, there are some contingencies to take into account, but we can perform better. And I think that this is something that we need to integrate. Trade union organizations, CFDT, and I do agree with Ellen Ray, we are not going to relocate low added value productions. That's not the idea behind the project. I think that we need to focus on the essential needs in a country. It's a matter of democracy. For low added value productions, I mean, we need to focus on strategy. Of course, regarding food and regarding farming, it's better not to rely on other countries, but in terms of strategy, it's a matter of innovation. Public policy should support innovation, and there's another driver that is a formidable one, i.e. ecological transition. And with ecological transition, we have things to do. So in companies, I mean, we need to revisit the productive patterns, we need to revisit the way we work, and then social and labor-related issues, I mean, will be dealt with. Of course, these issues have to be dealt with, but in our country, we have an effort to make regarding the role of social dialogue, labor management union dialogue. So there are two questions that are broader. Regarding the tensions, we talked about economic growth that could reach 6%. I mean, you've seen the colossal figures of INSEE, but the government is cautious, 5%. Banque de France, 5.75%. But growth is back for you, Laurent Berger. So those who are in the front light, I mean, do they set in motion a process whereby the others will follow suit. Of course, I mean, we can be very happy with the return of growth. We thought that some businesses would stall, but they are growing, so we are very happy with that trend. But it's an everlasting question. The macroeconomic analysis, relevant, necessary, insightful, but how people experience all that. In some sectors, they are in a bad patch, or there are some sectors that haven't been really impacted by the health crisis, but the employees were in the first line or in the second line. But have they felt that the situation is picking up? But what about recognition? What about the idea of being grateful? So I think that it's important to take that into account. Mrs. McGregor, do you want to react on that? Allow me to make an analogy between what Laurent Berger said and the role of state. To centrally plan in the long term, it should be a balanced process, and I think that all the stakeholders, all the local stakeholders and players, I mean, should be involved. And this is very relevant to the public debate. So regarding offshore wind farms, we need to turn to the local aspect. Hélène Ray?
Do you want to say a word? Yes, I wanted to rebound on the conversation that was very interesting. I think that I see that there's a consensus on the fact that the robotization, the 5G have the potential to create jobs. We also have to see that the trainings are going to be a very big constraints to make that happen. And in digitalization, women are very little represented in engineering schools, in engineer jobs. So there's a major effort to be made to increase the volume and to increase the gender diversity. That's my first point. These new technologies that are now spreading throughout the industry, and that's very good, a lot of them are created outside of Europe. We just adopt them. So the question remains, how do we see the creation of technologies, disruptive technologies that we cannot imagine yet, but what ecosystem would produce this in Europe? What are the institutions, what are the people who would finance those ecosystems in the 10-year, 15 years horizon? I don't know who has the answer around the table. Jean-Bernard Lévy, on the training, you probably have a word to say. Maybe Stéphane first. I don't think that we can say in our jobs that technologies are all coming from non-European countries. If we talk about the 5G, we have two major players, Nokia and Ericsson, in that field, who are very competitive from a technological point of view. On the standardization of the 5G, on the industrial manufacturing of the 5G components, the specificity of the digital world is that there is a core system, which are the infras, and then there's a bunch of innovations around it. 1 million developers who put some apps in all possible fields and major systems of Apple or Google. So this is this huge number of actors that is happening also, that is present also in Europe. So I think that around the facilitation of access for these young innovators, developers, startuppers, who create all the tools that are here to help them, we have a real card to play in Europe, because I believe that in Europe we have an identity regarding this new digitalization of society that is very strong and is very well identified versus China, but also versus the States. So I think there's a real European will to go further in the path of this digitalization. Jean-Bernard Lévy, I'm going to talk about training because you've invited me to do so. I think there's a movement of decentralization of training programs, which is happening, and it should keep going. I think the baccalaureate is probably going to be suppressed because it does not stand for anything anymore, and we are working in regions, and we can see that there's a very good momentum to bridge the needs of the companies and the needs of the region. What I would like to say on the role of the state, we're a bit stuck when we're in the state's position, because a lot of things in regulated industries depend on Europe. And even if we have a good speech that there's industrial policies in Europe, and we've seen it on the Hercules project, clearly it's however we feel about the commissaries, but it's the management of the competition laws that will have the last word. The state has a hard time speaking up versus that, and the solutions are found locally and in the decentralization. So I think that from that perspective, and we see it today, there should be a difference being made between the energy policies by region, and that a uniform energy policy decided at the level of the state, that should be a thing of the past, because we have the different geographies. France is not uniform in its energy sectors. I would like to go back on one of the points that Laurent Berger raised. I know very well the responsibility of the companies in case of the duration of the contribution for the retirement. It is very important that if we extend the time where people go on retirement, people will have to change their view on their employees who are past 59, because today when you look at an employee who's 59, you look at him as he's already out the door. So the deal that we'll have to accept as companies is, if the age of retirement becomes 64 or 65, well, the whole career will have to be mapped out beyond 59 years old. And I will conclude by saying that for me, if we talk about a state that is a strategist, the gardener, I prefer ours, which is the Colbert model. Ross McInnes, a question. The sovereignty, to conclude, is industrial sovereignty something that seems imperative to you? In certain sectors, absolutely, but the state will be even more equipped to safeguard sovereignty in topics such as nuclear, aeronautics, defense, if it stops acting as a fireman and going to put out fires in all the other sectors. A good state that will be a gardener and a regulator will be the solution. Catherine McGregor, what do you think about industrial sovereignty? What is your position regarding industrial sovereignty in your job, in your field? So the energy sovereignty seems to be very important. The industrial sovereignty must be balanced with competitiveness, which is a very important point. And this compromise is not so easy to find. So to concentrate on competitive advantages and not try to do everything by ourselves. Laurent Berger, and then maybe Stéphane Richard. We hear a lot this word, and that's why, particularly for the pharmaceutical industry, is it something that is important to you or not? Yes. I don't know if we should stick to the word, but if in a number of sectors we consider that it's not strange that we produce nationally, and that we have some autonomy to do so, I think it's pretty normal. And there's a lot to be found in terms of reindustrialization as well, on circuits that are based on territories and regions. I think that's an important point. I cannot not react on the question of the retirement. One employee out of two today, when he goes on retirement, is not, or when he keeps his job, cannot be employed again. Why? Because companies have some redundancy plan before the legal age for retirement. So maybe if we pushed it back, they'd do it later, but that still shows a form of cynicism. And the second point is that for the other part of these employees, it's a form of invalidity. The question of retirement has never been a taboo for the CFDT, my trade union, is that we don't treat the same way employees such as we can have in this room, like myself, and employees that have been exposed for a long time, who are working in cleaning, food and beverage, distribution sectors, and who don't have the same capacities to retire late. So that's why the topic is to be dealt with globally, and we won't fix it in a few months before the presidential election. We understood your message. Stéphane Richard, we don't want to go back on the Huawei file. What do you think of sovereignty in the digital sector? Does it still mean something? Oh, yes, it means a lot. I think that it's even a subject that is even more important than all the other ones, and the sovereignty is data. That's what I was saying earlier. This capacity to keep the control of our data, of the data of companies, and not only companies, the sensitive companies, so to speak, but of all data that are produced, that are the richness and the value of contemporary economy. There's a risk today, it's actually a reality, of a massive loss of these data towards some technological powers that we have in the planet. Mostly for us, it's America. That's the first issue. And the second issue, that is a political one, is today we have laws. There's a Cloud Act in the US that allow all the hosts of data in the US, you know who I mean, and who of course collect a considerable amount of data from companies from all over the world, to be requested to give this data to the American government. So this is a very important topic, and Europe has to be more active on that, and they have started with Thierry Breton to do that, to make sure that the major operators and the major industrial players collaborate on the topic. Hélène Ray, you work for the London Business School. What do you feel about the sovereignty? Of course, I agree with what was said. Geopolitical situation has changed completely with a China that is becoming more and more sovereignist, and an American pole that is getting stronger with the major companies, whereas Europe in the middle of that. Not only Europe has to get organized, but they also have to think of the next step. And I'm not reassured yet, to be honest with you. So let's not start again. Let's go to the next step, which is for us lunch and maybe having a drink. So thank you, everyone, for your contribution. Thank you very much.